are going to go ahead and get started. We are pleased to have you join us today for a session with my esteemed colleagues from our ESDs, Allison Fritz and Shelby Lockhart. My name is Chrissy Johnson. I'm the Assistant Director of Attendance and Engagement here at OSPI. And today we will be focusing specifically on boosting your teaming for better attendance and engagement and exploring what types of data we need access to do this work. It is the first of 2 sessions. And with that, we will get going. Our objectives today are understanding the whole picture of a team and the key functions of an attendance team, assessing your existing teams and identifying concrete next steps for establishing or strengthening your team, and lastly, determining the types of data you will need to access to answer essential questions related to attendance and engagement. Again, I'm Chrissy with OSPI, and I'll hand it over to Allison to introduce herself.
Good morning. My name is Allison Fritz. I'm the Attendance and Re-Engagement Coordinator for New ESD 101.
And Shelby?
Hi, everyone. Shelby Lockhart over here in ESD 105. I'm the TNL Program Manager with a focus on attendance and re-engagement for our region.
Excellent. And we will introduce Dr. Jennifer Norman in a little bit. Before we get started, I wanted to share just a couple of resources with you. Earlier this week, our team with ESD 112 did a Truancy 101 webinar, and the recording is now available. We will have that link available to you in both the linked agenda and the PowerPoint slides for today, and you can find those in the chat. Jenna is dropping those in. We also have recently published withdrawing guidance and have a webinar from last March. So this is a really critical time where districts are potentially withdrawing students from enrollment when they're not attending. And so we really want you to be paying attention to this guidance and clarify that it's not something that is required from the state. And as I mentioned earlier, you are here as part of a 2-session series on boosting your teaming and leveraging your data. So we'll get into more about leveraging your data to implement effective tiered interventions next week. I wanted to share OSPI's attendance guiding principles with you. First, attendance and engagement are foundational to student learning. If students are not in attendance, they cannot learn. Absences are a data point that tell us when students have not accessed instruction. And absences are a critical early warning indicator. And that early warning indicator can tell us a number of things. It can tell us if there are inequities that are being caused or perpetuated by our systems. They can also reflect when a student and family might need more support. Absences are really an opportunity to get curious about why students aren't attending. And students and families are our best partners to understand the barriers to attendance. And we are hoping to support schools and districts to build your systems so that you can take advantage of the opportunities for prevention and intervention before involving the court. Attendance is integral to the Washington State MTSS framework. And these are the 5 components of Washington's MTSS. We have team-driven shared leadership. Integrating attendance as part of an MTSS requires data-based decision-making. Engaging families, students, and communities is critical because attendance is an all-hands-on-deck need. And we have the opportunity to implement a continuum of supports from Tier 1 to Tier 3 using evidence-based practices. And we will be using this as a guide for our content and resources today. with that, I'll hand it over to Allison.
Thank you, Chrissy. Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be able to talk about teaming. I feel like there's both an art and a science to it. So I love talking and working on this topic. I also feel it's one of the tougher topics to offer professional development on, because I think we've all been on so many teams, both in our professional and personal lives. And it's easy to take teaming for granted and think anybody can be on a team. And yes, anybody can be on a team. But what we're talking about today is how to build effective teams. What are some key aspects that you really can't do without, and leave you with some tools to kick off the work this year. So to start, I want to have us pull on some of our own existing mental models about teams, because there is a difference between showing up to have a team and actually building an intentional team that's going to be effective. So the next slide, as Chrissy mentioned, we're going to be talking about team-driven shared leadership, which is the first component in the MTSS framework, and I believe is the foundation for having a school-wide approach to attendance. So the activator that we're going to start with, I'll invite you all to put into the chat. But first, think about a memorable team that you've been a part of. It could be personal or professional. And I use the word memorable because it could be memorable for a positive reason or perhaps for a negative reason. And so I invite you to share in the chat either one, something that made the team so effective, and you can put a 1 in front of that, or 2, something that made the team ineffective, and put a 2 in front of that. So an example might be 1, everyone cared about the work that the team was responsible for. Or 2 might be the leader was very controlling and no one felt empowered to take initiative or propose ideas. So I'd ask folks to take a minute and start popping into chat their answers. And I'm going to pause for a moment so I can then read off some of what we are seeing. So I see some things that made the teams effective. We're having a shared vision, everyone invested in the goal of the team, mutual respect amongst members and shared control, being student and solution focused. We were all on the same page and wanted to do what was best, full participation. And then a number 2, something that maybe made it ineffective, a leader overrode the team's decisions, lack of communication, self-centered intentions. So as you're looking at what's in chat, I'm sure you can identify with many of these things about experiences that we've all had on teams where we felt like this team was worth our time for various reasons that we'll talk about, and maybe things that you have seen that you want to avoid in your practice. So thank you for engaging in that, and we'll continue to the next slide. So functions of an attendance team. And when I say attendance team here, I'm not speaking exclusively to an individual team that's working on attendance, because as we'll talk about later, there are multiple structures that you can have. And so you might have attendance embedded within another team. But for the purpose of this conversation, whatever team is addressing attendance, they should be focusing on all of these functions. So first is analyzing school-wide and student group attendance trends. Not just looking at lists of individual students, but looking at what are the patterns and where are areas that we could intervene. And Shelby will be talking more about that in the second half of our session today. The team should also organize an attendance continuum of supports, and that would include universal attendance strategies and absence prevention in Tier 1. We're going to talk a lot about Tier 1, both today and in the next session. They should also look at group interventions based on barriers in Tier 2, and then individual student interventions in Tier 3. And again, we'll talk later about how these functions could be split between multiple teams, but a school should have teams that are addressing all of these functions. Lastly, the team is also responsible for mobilizing the school community to address attendance. We know attendance is not something that can be handled by a single person. It's not on any one individual's shoulders. Every single person in the school has a role to play to promote attendance and engagement. And so the attendance team can and should be thinking about, how do we get folks on board? How do we support a mentality shift so that we have a culture where everybody sees that they can support keeping students engaged in school? I want to share a metaphor that was shared with me. And the picture on the right shows a building that started to flood with people trying to find a path to avoid the water. And the question I want us all to ask ourselves is, are we too busy mopping up the floor to turn off the faucet? And so we can think of flooding as students disengaging from school. And this has been happening in very high rates in recent years. And we're all trying to see what can we do to engage students and re-engage those who have completely disconnected. So we might find ourselves trying to mop up the water on the floor by addressing what's immediately in front of us. And maybe in this metaphor, that looks like students with externalizing behaviors, or students who are failing all their classes, things that pop up on our radar really easily and quickly. But what we need to be supporting those students, and we need to be looking at what's causing the flooding. So maybe it's a basement that's flooding and there's a spigot that's turned on. And instead of looking to find the spigot and simply turning it off, we are exclusively focusing on mopping it up. So hoping that we can all be shifting our practice so that instead of returning to kind of the default mode of responding to crises that are arising, we can also be trying to find the faucet, finding what is causing students to disengage from school. What can we do about our school environment to make it a place where students and families want to be connected to? And I hope the point I want to make is that all the functions of the attendance team are critical. It's not just working on at the tier 3 level. We need to really be doubling down on tier 1. And session 2 next week, we'll talk more about some tier 1 strategies you can consider. But I just want to remind us that when we're looking at tier 1 and systems in our meetings with our team, we should never be talking about individual students. We are looking at the health of the overall system. And so you can be asking if progress monitoring is happening for those receiving tier 2 and 3, but we're not doing progress monitoring in this moment when we're looking at tier 1. And it's a very hard habit to break, and you'll need to put in some norms to try to address it when the natural inclination is to kind of shift in that way. But you want some norms so that your team can reset and get back on track. Now we're going to do a Zoom poll. And Jenna will share the poll with you. There are 4 questions. And the first is around your current teaming structure for attendance. Do you have a team? And if so, is the team a single team addressing all the tiers, or is it embedded in another team? And then the other 3 questions around the work happening at the different tiers. So I'll invite you to answer the questions, and then we'll share the results. Give it about 10 more seconds, and then we'll wrap up the poll. Okay, fabulous. So hopefully everyone is seeing the poll results. If not, maybe Jenna can help me. But so I see for the first question around current teaming structures, 20% of folks do not have a team yet. And we're so pleased you're here, and hopefully we'll give you some strategies. 47% have one team that is addressing attendance, and 33% have attendance embedded either in an existing team or multiple teams. So the majority seem to have one team that's addressing attendance, but a good portion have other structures as well. The second question around if the team is looking at tier 1, 60% say yes, and 22% said no. The remaining don't have a team yet. Tier 2, whether the team is addressing group interventions based on barriers, 60% say yes, and 20% say no. And then the last question, 3, does the team support individual students with more intensive interventions? And 76% said yes. So this is pretty common to see that when we have teams that are working on attendance, often we can be very strong in tier 3 and doing individual case management. And so hopefully today we'll provide some ideas and structures where you can be bolstering the tier 1 and tier 2 work as well. So thank you all for participating in that poll. I mentioned we'll be talking about some teaming structures for attendance, and these are different structures that we've seen schools and districts that we've been working with over the last year through the ESSER Attendance and Reengagement Project, some ways that they've structured their teams. And I want to start by saying there is no one single prescription for whether you should create a new team for this work or embed it within existing teams. You need to look at your system, your MTSS structure, consider the teams you have in place, and then decide, based on those functions of an attendance team on the previous slide, can those be embedded within the work of a team that you have, or would it be more effective to have a separate team? So the first diagram in A depicts where attendance is embedded with the functions are separated. So the teal boxes on this slide will show where the attendance works lives. And for simplification, there's one box that says other teams in yellow, and we know schools have multiple teams, but this box just represents all the other teams. So in one iteration that we've seen, there's a tier 1 team, such as a PBIS team, or they might call it tier 1, and their focus is on universal prevention. And then there's a separate team, maybe that's focusing on tier 2 and 3. And one of the advantages of that is having a more narrowed focus can make it easier to move forward as a team and implement things more quickly because you're all aligned in your vision and what you're supposed to be doing. A challenge with this can be communication and syncing the work between the tiers. So if you have this model and are choosing to do it, make sure there are good lines of communications between the two teams. For example, if the tier 2, tier 3 team is seeing a pattern of a lot of students that are coming up needing tier 3 supports for a particular reason, it might be worth conversing with the tier 1 team to see, is there something we can do universally that could support all students? Example B is having a single attendance team that addresses all the tiers. And an advantage of this is that team can look at the whole picture. They are looking at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 and can align the efforts of that work. A disadvantage or a challenge is that the work can get siloed from other initiatives in the school, and the team can get stuck on tier 3 if they don't have a strong structures in place and norms. So communication across all these examples is just really important to make sure the attendance work doesn't get siloed and that it's integrated. And the last example that we see is attendance embedded within either the leadership team or another team. And advantage there is attendance is prioritized because it's on the agenda for the leadership team or whatever team is meeting. Challenge can be bandwidth and having time to dedicate to this work. So again, there's no right way to do it. Look at your system and decide what is the right one for you. And there's a resource at the bottom of this slide with a worksheet that you can use to map out your existing teams if that would be helpful. Who is on your team? If you already have a team working on attendance, you might ask yourself, is there anyone else who's missing from the table? And if you don't yet have a team, you could ask who is directly connected to the issues and might be able to contribute to this work. This slide includes a list of folks you might consider, and I'm not going to read them all, but some options might be your attendance secretaries, truancy liaison, nurse, counselor, migrant ed liaison, McKinney-Vento liaison, teachers. Think about who can actively participate and contribute, and know that you might have some members who are attending all the meetings, and you might have others that you can invite strategically based on the topic that's being discussed or the students that are going to be discussed. Important note that team members should be able to bring the perspectives of the students they are serving, and teams should be looking at ways that they can incorporate feedback and input from families, students, and communities. A team could be 2 people, or it could be 8. It just depends on the size of your school and the size of your staff and who's available to do this work. And starting out with a team of 2 people is a perfectly valid way to go, and continuing on with a team of 2. There's no prescriptive way that this should work. The next slide depicts different roles that any team should have, not just an attendance team, but the resource that's included from Chicago Public Schools breaks down each of the roles as it relates to attendance. And so if you're looking for a worksheet that you could fill out with your team that defines the responsibilities, this is a good one. But really important, something that's often neglected, make sure you're designating who is the facilitator and the lead for these meetings, who that person is responsible for developing the agenda, getting things on the calendar, convening. Have somebody who can be responsible for bringing data to the meetings, have a note taker, a timekeeper. You can have a process checker who's making sure we're respecting our norms. And then you have other members who can contribute as they're available. This slide is a sample attendance team agenda for a team that is addressing all 3 tiers. And so if you are considering a system or you have a system where the tiers are broken up to different teams, you could just select the items that are relevant for you, but really encourage you to decide what is your agenda going to look like, because it will make all of your subsequent meetings throughout the year much easier and give people a sense of what to expect when they come to the meeting so that they can come prepared to participate and engage. There is a resource with a sample agenda template that is that first link, and it includes places for all the things that we are describing to you as really key and important for teaming work. So it allows you to designate the roles. It allows you to indicate the meeting purpose. And there's a place to indicate decisions and action steps. So and this example agenda shows starting out by looking at the aggregate data trends, what is happening across the student body and at different times of year and for different student groups. And then you start unpacking patterns. Then you look at your tiered systems of support and think about if there's areas that you want to bolster, focus on. And then you have a block of time where you're looking at students in need of tier 2 and tier 3 supports. And then you close with your meeting decisions and next steps. That's just one example that you could use. Some best practices in teaming. The first one, having a clear function and purpose and adding it to the top of your agenda. The template that we are showing in the previous slide has this, but I'm not sure how many of you have probably experienced this. I'm currently experiencing it right now on a team that I'm a part of, where we come to meetings and it seems that only the facilitator knows why we are meeting. And many of us in the room don't have a sense of, is this an information sharing meeting? Are we meant to contribute ideas? Are we trying to make decisions? And so it's very helpful for active participation from all your members if you are explicit with what is the purpose, what are we trying to accomplish with this meeting. The second one is having the right people at the table, making sure that there are the perspectives that you need to address the different systems in your school that might be contributing to student disengagement or that positively affect student engagement. So just looking at who is invited to those teams. Again, have clearly defined roles. I've been on many teams and meetings where there is no designated note taker. And while that may seem like something that a step that could be skipped, what I've seen happens is nobody is recording next steps. And then you come to the next meeting and people either don't remember what they committed to from the previous meeting, or it can feel awkward to hold someone accountable for something they said they would do if there's no kind of documentation. And in meetings I've attended where there is a note taker, it makes it much easier at follow-up meetings to stay accountable for the steps that you said you were going to carry out. Clearly defined roles, team agreements. Try to set some time up at the start of the year to collectively define your agreements. You want to make sure that people feel respected, feel that this is a positive experience for them, that they have ways that they can express either disagreement or propose new ideas. So team agreements are important. You can use decision-making protocols that will be very helpful to help steer the conversation and keep it focused on your data and avoid diverging off onto, for example, talking about individual students. So there's lots of different examples of data protocols you can use. Again, agendas and minutes. Schools that are smaller might feel that this feels very formal and awkward, and we've worked together for years and we have a system and it works for us. And it might feel that way at first if you're starting to use agendas and minutes and you haven't before, but it will help you use your time in the most effective way possible. It's so much more satisfying to be part of a team that's moving towards accomplishing its goal and making a difference, rather than feeling like you're on a team and you're not really sure what is being accomplished in the time you are together. Also, meetings of people cost money, so you want to make sure that the time is well used. I also want to say in this regarding agendas and minutes that there's a difference between leading a team and building a team. And sometimes we want to skip the step of activator or icebreaker or just have dedicated space to checking in with each other in relationships. but it's very strategic and needed. It's not something that we can consider as optional, because sooner or later there will be conflict on teams, and you need to be able to rely on those relationships that you've established in order to overcome those conflicts and arrive at solutions. Data protocols. I realized my description of decision-making protocols was what I wanted to say for data protocols. But for decision-making protocols, something that I've become fond of is the VISTA 5 strategy, where when you need to make a decision, you're asking all the members to indicate their level of agreement with a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 5. And it's a way to engage everyone rather than simply asking is anybody opposed to moving forward with this? And unless everybody has a 4 or 5, you don't move forward. You keep talking about it until folks are in agreement. So there's different decision-making protocols you can use to help both speed up your meeting and ensure that everybody's voices are heard. Number 8 is calendar. Set standing meeting times for your meetings and do your best to respect them. We know that things will come up and you'll have to reschedule, and that is totally fine. But when you do have to do that, try to make sure you do find another time to meet, because it communicates that this work is being prioritized. And there is research that shows that when frequency of meetings slows down, the effectiveness and the rate of the work slows down. And that seems super obvious. And if you imagine teams that you've been a part of where meetings often get canceled, imagine how you start to view that work. And maybe if there were things that you were responsible for and well, like the meeting's probably going to get canceled, so I don't have to worry about that. This is why having a meeting schedule and sticking to it can be really helpful for the success of the team. And then the last 2 are action planning and doing plan, do, study, act cycles or progress monitoring. So having an action plan where you have responsibilities delegated to folks and you have action steps linked to goals that your team has set can help you stay on track and measure progress. And make sure you are measuring your progress, celebrating the wins as they come up, because it will help boost the morale of your team and show you that the work that you're doing is making a difference. So wanted to leave you with some first steps that you can take now that we're back to school, and if you're not sure where to start with this work. And so if you're setting up a new team, think about first whether you need a separate team or if you're going to embed the work in an existing team. And then once you discuss with your colleagues and make that decision, you identify who can be the team lead and who are the members and invite them to the first meeting. If you're continuing with an existing team, invite and orient any new members so that they get a sense of what is the purpose of the team and what existing materials and documents do you have, if there's a shared drive that you can invite them to so they can access those. And then consider completing a team self-assessment. There's a link to Attendance Works school team self-assessments that can be done to help you identify some priorities for your team on things you want to grow in that year. And so whether you're starting on the left or the right, either one, these green boxes on the bottom will show you some objectives that you could consider using for your first few meetings to help you apply all the best practices in teaming that we were talking about before. So in your first meeting, you might establish or revisit your purpose, agree on your norms, set the roles and calendar those meetings, and then perhaps take a self-assessment if you have time or start reviewing your results. Then in your second meeting, go ahead and click through to the next box. The second meeting, you can review your attendance data if you didn't already do that in the previous meeting and start looking at what are the trends, what are we seeing, what else do we need to know? And again, Shelby will be talking more about that shortly. Set a long-term goal as well as short-term goals, things that you can accomplish in 45-day cycles. Agree on what your meeting agenda template's going to look like. And then moving forward, all your remaining meetings, you can rely on that agenda template that you've set and populate it with things that are timely that are coming up, but also things that you know you need to talk about at every meeting. So I am now very excited to be able to introduce my colleague from East Valley High School, Dr. Jennifer Norman. She is the assistant principal there and has been since the last school year, and wanted to invite her to share some of the practices and experiences that she had last year and what her plans are for this year for the teaming work. So Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I think what we're going to do is you're going to ask me some questions. Is that right?
Yes.
All right.
So my first one is, I'm hoping that you can share with us the context for setting up your team last year. What was already in place when you arrived? What did you assess that was important to establish? And who was on your team? What did it look like?
Yeah. So we were in a unique situation. We were all new. So I was a new assistant principal at the high school. I had been previously in middle school. I was new to the district. We had a new attendance re-engagement specialist from ESD 101, and she was new to our district. Had done a little bit of work in the spring, but new for the school year. And then we also had a new Becca secretary that didn't get hired until about 2 weeks into school. So our entire attendance team was brand new, and really part of our thing was we had to know that we were new and we didn't know what we didn't know. And we had to be okay with that. And so we recognized that it was going to be a baseline year for us and kind of go from there.
Great. And I mentioned previously the challenge that teams can face when I believe your team last year was a team that was looking at all 3 tiers.
Yes.
Can you tell us, how did you ensure that the time didn't all get sucked into just tier 3? Because I know you guys did a lot of really awesome tier 1 stuff, especially. How did you spread it out across the 3 tiers?
So we had a running agenda, and we had the roles like what you were talking about previously, where our agenda, we could add to it throughout the week so that we knew when we came in. We always met on Tuesdays, and we met after we call it CARB in East Valley, so Community Attendance Re-Engagement Board or Community Engagement Board. So we would always meet Tuesdays after we had CARB meetings, and it was on our calendar. It was time that we honored, and we all came together. We would decide the next meeting, like, are we meeting here? Are we meeting there? Where are we meeting? Just because of logistics. And we really had that standing agenda with the clear roles. And so within the standing agenda, we had tier 1, we had tier 2, we had tier 3, we had CARB, we had student of concern. So new students that we were like starting to see pop up, or if we had heard something throughout the week, we would drop their names in there. And so while we did talk specifics about like what can we do building wide, what are some of those tier 1 interventions that we can start to put into place, or supports or celebrations, we also wanted to make sure that each piece was something that we looked at. And again, it goes back to we didn't know what we didn't know. And so it was, what do we normally do for this? Does anybody know what we normally do for this? And then trying to figure that out and plan for it.
Mm-hmm. Can you share a little bit about some of the tier 1 strategies that you selected, and how did your team kind of decide what was needed?
So one of the things we didn't, I'm going to go keep saying, we didn't know what we didn't know. So we kind of like started to hear from other people, like, are we going to do this? And then we'd look into it. We researched to find different tier 1 interventions that we might be able to do. But one of the things that we did was Wednesday WOWs. And so we would pull attendance information and data using school data solutions. And on Wednesdays, we would send an email out to students and their families if they had improved attendance over the previous 2 weeks. And that was a huge thing because we started to hear from families like, hey, thanks for checking in on me. Another thing that we did is I started pulling data every day to see, like, I know that this kid was marked absent, but I know that they were here. So trying to be intentional about finding out, where were they 3rd period? Because they were here 1st and 2nd and 4th and 5th. And so I started emailing out teachers to say, like, is your attendance good? And the first day that I did it, there were 76 kids on my list. After that first week of doing it consistently, there were 13. So it really kind of improved some of that attendance work that we were doing. I'm trying to think of some other things that we did. We automated our process for sending out our letters. It was something that hadn't been being done before. The person that was in that role had left kind of mid-year. And so we figured out how to automate our processes so that we could send out the letters. I put on my calendar a time to do needs assessments. And so my attendance secretary would help by putting in names of students that I needed to meet with. And then I would throughout the day meet with those kiddos, automated that process as well. And so just a lot of different, trying it. Did that work? Nope. Okay, let's try this.
Mm-hmm. You already shared some practices that it sounds like were helpful for your team. You described that you had a standing agenda that all the team members had access to and could add to, and you defined your roles. You mentioned that it was really useful to have a meeting following the CARB meetings so that you could follow up immediately on any next steps that were defined in the CARB meetings. Were there any other practices that you found were helpful for your team that you either want to continue this year or new ones that you're adding?
Yeah. So one of the things that we did is shared documents, right? And so we each had a color when we would add notes so that we knew who was talking and who had talked to which family. We had within that shared document, like student of concerns. So students that were starting to pop up on our radar, students that we knew were having some mental health issues or some medical issues. We had students that we didn't know where they were because we were coming out of COVID and we had the 20-day drop. We had our SEAT classroom that we created, which is our student engagement attendance team. And it's a Google Classroom that has a ton of different resources. So we could give that out to families as we were starting to have conversations and invite students to it. We didn't drop students, which was a new practice for this building, that they, after 20 days, they would just drop them and who knows where they went. And like, we went back to try and find those kids and find out where they were at. We just kind of kept track of progress. We had, each of us had individual kids that we would try and meet with and, check in, whether in the hallway or, a quick passing. We're unique and we have what we call a reset room where students would get a swing by. And so our Becca attendance secretary, she would create times for kids to come in and check in with them. So a lot of different processes there.
And what you were describing about a new practice of not dropping students, I just want to highlight for folks, that's connected to what Chrissy had shared earlier about some withdrawal guidance. So if that's something that your district would like to consider trying, avoiding dropping students, but keeping them enrolled so that you don't lose track, definitely encourage you to check out that, either the webinar or the PDF of the guidance. Jennifer, I have one more question for you, but I do want to invite folks, if anybody has questions, either for Jen or myself regarding the content, we're going to have a couple minutes, so feel free to pop them into the chat if you do have something that you want to ask. But then my last question for you is, if you have any tips for others, is there anything you learned that you wish you knew before or something that you're changing about your practice this year?
Yeah, we learned a lot. So one of the things is I wish we would have had we would have reacted earlier than later. So instead of waiting for the truancy process to kick in, because you have 15 unexcused days or excused days, and then you go to the 15 unexcused. And then, so I wish that we would have had, we would have reacted earlier. I think we could have negated some of our students that kind of started to get lost. I wish we would have had a monthly to-do list. And so I wish we would have created that last year, because now I'm creating it this year. So in August, these are the things I need to do. In September, these are the things, October, November, throughout the year. I wish I would have learned how to do skyward letters in the system last year, because when my Becca secretary left this year, now I have to learn all over. And so I'm pretty excited because today I got my 3-day unexcused letters figured out and processed and automated. So those will be going out today, like a month earlier than they did last year. And the other thing is, I wish we would have looped in our attendance secretary earlier, because it was kind of like a separate. So she was finding things out, our counselors were finding things out, and then we would find things out. And I wish that we would have kind of come together a little bit earlier. I don't know how that would have looked, but it's something that we're working on this year. And so, yeah, those are some of our learnings that we've learned from last year.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do see one question that came to me directly. Is there anything that you can share about what your data looked like? Any improvements that you felt were made as a result of this teaming work that you did last year?
Yeah. So one of the things that we were pretty proud of is at semester, we sent out letters to families, And we had 500 letters that we sent out with kids that had, I think it was 85% or better attendance. And our building is 900. So more than half of our students got a letter saying congratulations. I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head. They were kind of fluctuating, but we would look, we would pull data from Student Data Solutions, and we would look at our monthly rate. And within our monthly rate, we were pretty consistent at 85%. We would see, like, during November, kids would drop a little bit. We'd see that. And so we'd have those kind of conversations. We would see, coming back from break, some of that. And so numbers off the top of my head, I haven't delved into yet, but yes, we did see improvement with what we were working on and what we were doing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and really appreciate everything that you shared, and good luck with your teaming this year.
Thank you. I got a whole new team this year, so we're going to learn it again, but we're ready to go.
All right, so we're going to get the slides back up and share the ask that is for a breakout room. So you're going to have about 12 minutes in breakout rooms, and would invite the person with the first name closest to the letter Z to facilitate. And hoping in your room you can discuss these two questions. The first is, what is the biggest barrier you face in setting up your team to address attendance, and how might you overcome it this year? And whether you're the one leading or responsible for the team, or you would be a member of this team, consider it from your perspective. And then the second question is, what is an immediate next step for either you or for your school that will help strengthen teaming around attendance and engagement? And I encourage you to think really specifically and think about what is something that feels manageable and winnable, so that you and your team can experience success. And when we come back out of the breakout rooms, I'll invite folks to share in the chat the next step that they want to work on. So keep that in mind as you're in your discussions. Jenna is going to send us off into rooms. Welcome back. Hopefully you had some good discussions with folks, and want to invite everyone to respond in chat to that second question. If you would be willing to share, what's that immediate next step that you're thinking about for either you or your school that will help strengthen teaming around attendance and engagement? I'm going to pause to give folks time to put into the chat the next step that they want to focus on. There's better data collection and analysis, setting up regular meetings and inviting the appropriate people, such as the attendance secretary, having universal structures and goals across the district, continue to get to know each other's strengths and reviewing protocols and processes that we use, asking how can we engage student leaders in boosting student attendance, schedule a first team meeting and start an attendance challenge, assemble the team and build the agenda for meetings, a tier 1 attendance campaign. We have a tier 1 problem because 2/3 of our school are chronically absent or at risk of being chronically absent. You're not alone. Making sure we add out regularly scheduled time to dedicate to attendance, having a proactive team. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your next steps, and feel free to keep popping them into the chat. While we go to the next slide, which is has some links to some different resources. I'm not going to talk about them in depth, but know that they are here. And the first two are some toolkits from Attendance Works about how to organize an effective school team and district team, if that could be of use to you as well. There's also a video about attendance team in action. And then I already talked about the map of existing school teams, but there's a year-long planning worksheet that you can use to set goals by season for your team across the tiers that could be helpful. So hopefully you've gained some things from this session, and I'm really pleased to turn it over to my colleague, Shelby.
Thank you, Allison. That was really great. I just have to do a big shout out to Brent. Your comment, we have a tier 1 problem, is just beautiful, because That is the work, right? A lot of us have a tier 1 problem. So I'm going to jump into the data part of this. I'm really excited to give a very foundational initial overview of some data work that you can be doing, ideally mostly with your tier 1 team, because that's where the magic happens and you get the best bang for your buck when you're trying to improve your attendance. So with that, let's dive in. So as we referred to before, there's those 5 components of an MTSS system in your schools and your district. And database decision-making is the second component. It really is what drives your teaming, your practices, and the work that you do to grow students and staff. So we're going to talk a little bit about data literacy in this work. There's 3 components that we highlight, and as you do this work, I know these probably really resonate with some of the movements you're making and some of the barriers you're hitting. So the first one really is access. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Does everybody have the information they need to make these decisions to change systems and practices for students? And then do we have the skills and knowledge to really analyze and make sense of the data? And then finally, do we have the discipline and the will and the focus to really get into an action planning mode? A lot of us have been in those meetings where we stare at the data and then we leave and nothing really got action planned. So we talk a bit about actionable data in this. Okay, go ahead. So in our state, we talk about chronic absenteeism. And here's a nice visual for your teams or your staff if you need it. 10% or more of the school days missed is chronic absenteeism, equates to a chronically absent student. And that includes excused or unexcused absences. The inverse of that, if you just flip it, is regular attendance. Go ahead and go back one slide just really briefly. So regular attendance is just the inverse of chronic absenteeism. So if you have an 80% regular attendance rate in your school, then you have a 20% chronic absenteeism rate. So they dance together. They're just the inverse of each other. Okay. So fist of 5s just in the chat on a scale of 1 to 5. I'm really curious. These are a couple questions we're just throwing out on the table. It's a very common questions in our region that I'm asking right now of attendance teams. Do you have access? And I would actually add, do you have access to visual daily, weekly, and monthly data that tells you who is not coming to school? And do you know your chronic absenteeism rates? Last year, year before. Go ahead, fist of 5 in the chat. 1, I have no idea where that information is. 5, oh yeah, we look at this stuff all the time. We have really great visual data. We have weekly visual data. We all know our chronic absenteeism rate. We know where to find it. All right. Wow, we're seeing quite the medley there. Quite a few, kind of middle of the road, 3s, 2s, couple 5s. Okay, so these are critical things to have access to. And I really want to emphasize visual data because that's when things become actionable and comprehensible. When we data mine and pull big reports and lists of kids' names, that really puts us in molasses mode. It slows us down. We can't really take action at that point, especially as a tier 1 and tier 2 team. All right, keep on going. So a couple guiding questions I like to keep at the table when we're doing that teaming work and looking at data is who is missing. So imagine you're with a tier 1 team and you ask who's missing, who's not coming. When are they missing? Is it Mondays? Is it Fridays? Is it second period? Is it sixth period? Why might they be missing? What's our best information that we have to determine why they're not coming sixth period or Monday? And most importantly, always and forever, as you do this work and go on this journey, what other information do we need to answer those 3 questions? So you're always trying to build more robust information systems and get better and better and better at having the right information at the table to make really good decisions. Okay. So before we get into some examples of data, I really want to zoom out again and remind folks, if you're doing the work of building multi-tiered systems of support, academically, behaviorally, and integratedly, you cannot do this work without good data. Data is foundational to all the implementation and all the decision-making, whether it be student outcome data like attendance, or it be process measures like a really good attendance TFI or a PBIS TFI, or walkthroughs, learning walks. So I just want to highlight that from McIntosh and Goodman. So what types of data do we need? So let's talk about Tier 1 attendance data. This is really your universal team. I joke around, I was just in a school district yesterday. I was in Wapato yesterday, and we talked about the Tier 1 team being a lot like that PBIS team, right? And sometimes we integrate with PBIS in the attendance world. It is your staff that loves to have sparkles and tutus and has a lot of fun and has that real positive response to any types of hot spots you might see in your school or your district. So that Tier 1 attendance team really wants to get good at prevention. They are the ones that look ahead and say, okay, when are big groups or big masses of kids not coming? When are our holiday dips? When is our spring break dip? When do students go to visit their families? When do kids go fishing? Is it Mondays? Is it Fridays? Is it 6th period, 2nd period? When do we hit those dips? So that's really the data that needs to be at the table in a visual format. You don't want list of kids. You want a really nice, clean visual set of data. And you want your attendance team to be able to pull that regularly, your Tier 1 attendance team. So somebody on your team's got to have that access and get that visually up on the wall. Tier 2, you're really looking for the barriers and grouping by barrier. So in this environment, imagine you have a Tier 2 team, and they are looking at students who may not be coming because of a barrier. So we gave some examples here of transportation, students who experience homelessness or are in the foster care system, or we have an example of oftentimes our 9th graders, sometimes our middle school students are within some poor grading practices or experiencing poor grading practices. And so they begin to lose hope and begin to disengage. So we have a group of practitioners really looking at this through the lens of barrier, not necessarily students, and thinking about what the students' problems are. You're really trying to assign staff to, and we kind of call it barrier busters. So this is the team that gets in and goes, okay, I'm going to really engage in that, the grading practices work on our 9th grade success team, because I just really see the impact on our 9th grade cohort. We've looked at the grading books and we see that they come until they fail. And then we start to lose them. It's really not the students they want to be here. So that's just an example of a way to kind of tweak that, that lens or look at the data a little differently. And then Tier 3 attendance data is really your top 5%, and that's that case management mode. I will say, just having been out in the field, Tier 2 and Tier 3 is where we love to live as adults, because it really makes us feel good to go one kid at a time and help them and do all that really good work. And it is important, but your most important work and where we need leadership discipline is to stay in the Tier 1 environment and add as much resources and energy and time to Tier 1, and hold ourselves accountable to never, ever in a Tier 1 meeting talk about an individual kid if you can. Keep it at that universal prevention dialogue. So that's the challenge out there for you all in Tier 1 world. Okay. So tier one, another thing we talk a lot about is just some of our thinking around why students don't attend. And it's not either or, it's not chicken or the egg, it really is both. So I just gave the example of ninth grade success, right? We know in our data that a lot of ninth graders disengage because of poor grading practices. And so it really is about them really wanting to be here, but then the system often fails them, so they disengage. It is not that they don't want to be here, right? So we see both. We see if students don't come, they don't learn. And we also see if they don't learn, they don't come. Or if they feel like the system isn't designed for them, they won't come. So just put that out there for tier one teams to think about. And then those tier two barrier buster teams, right? The work oftentimes at tier two is to look at ourselves and ask, maybe it's us. Maybe it's not them. Maybe it's our system. Maybe we need to barrier bust as a tier two team. Okay, go ahead. And then I'm putting this in here as a really like 10,000 foot view satellite data. If you're really starting to look at this work as a district or a building-wide school improvement team, this WSIF data is a really good starting place to really get a sense of where are we at in terms of regular attendance. And there's some trend data in there as well. But what I really want to highlight is this gets the conversation started and gets you curious around the subgroups of students who may or may not be responding to the systems you have in place. Orange means there's typically not a tier one system in place. It's an indicator that the tier one's missing. Blue means you may have some tier one systems and practices that are sustaining and students are responding to. So this is really good subgroup data and all student data. So we did something in ESD 105 that I think, just putting it on the table, it can be done at a school district. It can be done in a region. We really were curious, what did our blue and orange look like? If we're looking at the WSIF by individual schools, which is all public domain data, then what does it mean to look at it as a district or a region? So we did a regional lens on this. And we found out just by doing a quick WSIF data poll of our regular attendance rate for our whole region, we've got some tier one work to do. If there were more green here, we would have an indication that there's teaming and database decision-making in place at tier one. But we know the work ahead is really teaming and database decision-making at tier one. So this is elementary, secondary, same thing. And it's really based off of regular attendance rates. Okay. And these are our high schools. So previous to that was middle school. This is high school. So lots of work to be done at high school around tier one. Okay. So someone might say, well, what does that look like, sound like, feel like when you're in the room for tier one prevention teaming? And you've got data on the wall. If anybody's ever been in a PBIS meeting where you do the who, what, when, where, why protocol, it should sound and feel very similarly. And in fact, in school districts where we just don't have a lot of humans, I always say as quickly as you can, integrate your PBIS with your attendance tier one team. So get those folks in the tier one stance and say, who's not coming? When are they not coming? And why might they not be coming? And for a month, what could we do with our sparkles and tutus and really fun stuff like Jen Norman mentioned? She got that team together and they had a lot of fun with it. Where can we extinguish not only behaviors in PBIS, maybe they're being creative at recess to get their needs met, but think attendance. Well, where are we missing the mark on Monday mornings because kids aren't coming? What could we do to really engage students and families on Monday mornings? Or what is it in our system that's creating a barrier for our students? So this is really fun prevention work that tier one team can do. A lot of times those teams look at days of the week, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursday, Friday. They get really clear about what's excused, unexcused. In the end, it all matters, they all are absences. But here's an example of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So this tier one team probably should start looking at, well, what does Monday what happens on Mondays, right? Or sorry, flip it, Fridays. Friday has the higher absence rate. Mondays has the lowest absence rate. So anyways, they've got some work to do maybe on Fridays or even Wednesdays and looking at their system and seeing if they can get that absence count down. And this is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade example. So this middle school was looking at, well, what could we do at 8th grade to get our absence counts down here. Okay. So can your PBIS/attendance team answer these questions? This is a fist of 5 again. So in the chat, I just want to hear universally across your whole school, do you have the information you need to answer who's not coming, when are they not coming, and why might they not be coming? Do you have that visual data available for both your PBIS or your attendance team? Who isn't coming on in those patterns? Not individual kids, but what days of the week aren't they coming? What months aren't they coming? What period aren't they coming? If not, then put it right in your action plan. These are the next steps for your tier 1 team. We've got to get access to that data. Okay, next slide. So a couple other types of tier 1 attendance data that's really great for teams to have. I talked about having just outcome data for students. What is their regular attendance? What's their chronic absenteeism rate? When are they coming during the week? That's really student outcome data. You can also do your climate surveys, any kind of screener data you can do in combination with that. Some folks do screeners that have a few attendance questions in there, so you can get some universal trends of where kids may be hitting barriers for attending school. Your academic data, so like I said, your 9th grade success team, they have a pretty clear picture of who's academically making it and who's not, and combining that with your attendance outcomes is really powerful information. On the other side of the attendance or data set, you can look at process measures. So oftentimes we like to look at attendance data or outcome data, but we forget to ask ourselves, are we doing the things we said we were going to do to make change happen? So process measures are really great in terms of going to look for a really solid tier 1 in your building, either academically, attendance, behaviorally. So some of those are having an attendance TFI or a self-assessment, really looking at your tier 1 and saying, do we have those key things in place that we've shared today? Jen, Norm, Allison, do we have all those systems and practices in place, or do we not? Do we do walkthroughs to see how teachers are taking attendance, how we're managing welcoming students at the threshold of our classrooms? Do we have some of those indicators that we said we wanted to have in our building that create a positive and welcoming environment? And then do we see teachers, do we see folks using attendance data and accessing it and entering data? You know, Jen shared she got really involved in figuring out, well, how are we taking attendance, and our kids, when kids come, do we mark them present? Where are we missing the mark there? That's a real process measure. Counselor visit, nurse visits, all the folks in your building that have direct contact with subgroups of students have some really valuable data to share too. Those are just a few examples. And then I put this in here because we have this new student growth rubric, and we're just starting to have these conversations around historically the concept of growing kids or showing that we were growing kids. We'd have 2 points in time from like fall to spring sometimes, or fall to winter. Well, with our new student growth rubrics, it is unit by unit. So these short cycles of learning and engagement that happen with our students. And I just wanted to highlight that our state calls out, you can include your SEL standards, and our SEL standards have social engagement. So what might it look like if we said as a PBIS and attendance team, we really universally want kids to monitor their own progress in the SEL standards. And we can't do them all, so we're just going to do social engagement. Or we want our kids to monitor their attendance. We were in the Yakima School District recently with McKinley Elementary, and all the kids monitor their attendance progress. And it's a really powerful tool for them. And it builds that collective efficacy around a goal, right? The kids are really bought in, the staff's bought in, they make a big deal out of it. So I just want to highlight that's in student growth rubrics, the updated student growth rubrics. Okay, so we don't have access to this data. So working with your district data coordinator, you need to find out what you already have access to and how to get access to it. So this poses, where should a building team start? Ask simply for aggregate data, not lists of students, but really like days of the week, periods. How do you data mine that? How do you get visual data on that and get somebody or a team's skills and knowledge built around that? And where should a district team start? Ask for the same thing, aggregate attendance data. What are our seasons, our holidays? Where do we see these big calendar dips? How do we start building systems and practices that address these dips? Okay. And then, like Allison had shared before, there's some really good process mapping and flowcharts you can follow. So if you're not sure how to access your data, start here. At the top, you're working with your student information system. Yes, no, or unsure, it just walks you through. And I'll say in that first row of unsure, yes and no, over to the left where it says unsure, that's where people often hit the first barrier. But this gives you some guidance of who to go to, who to talk to, where to get help to get access to your data. So this is a really good flow chart in there to utilize. And then here's some go-to resources around OSPI, attendance policies, newsletters, Padlets, of course, Attendance Works, and then contacting your ESD coordinators.
Thank you, Shelby. I
Yeah,
can go
thanks,
ahead
Chrissy.
and take over from here.
Okay.
I specifically wanted to highlight, and I wish I had said it at the beginning, we are all here in partnership with the ESDs through ESSER funding of the Attendance and Reengagement Project. And that last link right there is a link to the attendance and reengagement coordinators that are in each of the 9 ESDs. And I know many of you are also here because of this funding and this project. But I wanted to highlight that we've got everyone listed on the OSPI website. And just to highlight, if you're not receiving the OSPI attendance newsletters, please do sign up. We are continuing to produce guidance and resources. We have a lot of stuff on the OSPI attendance webpage, but specifically, we end up putting a lot of like the guidance, technical types of stuff on that policies and guidance section of it. So we hope to see you again next week. We will be back to talk more about data and how to leverage that data to implement effective tiered interventions. So we'll see you again next Thursday at 10 a.m. Please take a moment to provide your feedback to us. It's really important. The link is in the chat. We'll also follow up with it. Really appreciate your time and your engagement this morning. And of course, all of the good work that you're doing trying to break down barriers for your school and students to attend and engage. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Allison. Thank you.